This is WCM's Park Update, a weekly show covering the outdoor hospitality industry, hosted by Ben Quiggle and Mike Gast. During each episode, you'll hear from special guests and campground experts on topics that will help your park flourish. WCM's Park Update is a production of Woodall's Campground Magazine.
Hi, I'm Ben Quiggle, editor of Woodall's Campground Magazine, and this is another episode of WCM's Park Update. And my esteemed colleague Mike Gass is here, president of the Emiola Group. And our show today is sponsored by Campgrounds of America. Our guest is somebody who's probably pretty familiar to our audience and then just the campground market in general. Mark Koep, the founder, CEO. I mean, he gives himself whatever title he wants of Campground Views. And it's always great to see you, Mark. I know I saw you a couple of weeks ago at the Glamping Show, and that was an incredible event. I love the Glamping Show. So,
I mean, well, if you remember, they had that dinner that one night, and all of a sudden you realized you were at a rave. And I was looking around, and people all. I mean, I thought I was in like a photo shoot for like Vogue or something like that. As I looked around, I'm like, is this a camping related show, or is this just a party?
I don't know. I mean, it's just amazing the kind of people you meet there, the people you run into. Everyone's so nice and generous, and I always learn something new whenever I go. I loved some of the AI stuff they shared, your presentation. You were on a column, right, Mark?
I did a presentation on marketing.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that, Mark. I remember.
Okay. Yeah, good. Clearly.
One of the things I noticed about my time at KOA Plus, going to the Glamping Show and experiencing what you guys just described, was that the folks back when I started 25 years ago with KOA, you would find owners that had sold the farm. I mean, they had ditched an early career. They had cashed out their 401ks. They had scraped together everything they owned in order to take this chance on a campground. And it seemed like when I was rubbing elbows with the glamping types, they came into this with a little bit more resources and a lot more people involved than it was the old mom and pop days.
Yeah, and at this show this year, there was a lot of international. So we connected with some folks from Mexico. Well, I guess Puerto Rico is not really. I guess, would you consider Puerto Rico? They're on an island, so they had to fly over here, right? So Puerto Rico, they had to fly over. Some people from Europe. There's a lot of just international interest. And to your point, Mike, there are some folks walking around there that have resources that make all of us look really, really poor. And there's a few folks there that we've connected with in the past that they're not just building. They're not. I mean, it's a glamping resort, but it's a glamping resort that they're planning on flying people in with helicopters to stay at it. Like, that's a different level of guest altogether.
I makes me wonder what when you were there with your product, was interest high? Because I would think the use of that on a glamp ground where they're typically smaller units, probably a little bit more uniform than the sites are. There's a real market out there for what you've got.
Yeah, in our case, yes and no. So it depends on the property. We do have a version of our technology that works for the inside of buildings. So it becomes more of a traditional virtual tour, like photo-based experience. We have that ability. What folks like is, especially those glamping resorts where the parking area is in one area and you have to hike into the glamping spots, we're able to travel that path to it. So it gives somebody a real perspective on how far it is from the car to the unit and so forth. So yeah, it's a good show. Although with the Glamping Show, one of the challenges there, and David, of course, has always done a good job of getting a lot of attendees at the show. The problem with that is the real people who actually own glamping resorts versus all the folks that want to own a glamping resort. There's a gigantic difference there. So a large portion of the attendees of that show want to own a glamping resort. And so my general opening question when somebody would walk by our booth was, so what brings you to the Glamping Show? And they would say, oh, I'm dreaming about it. Perfect. Nice to meet you. How can I help? Move on. Let's find somebody who's it's one of the crazy things about being at a trade show, and anybody who's ever worked behind a trade show booth knows this. Like, you spend all this money, all this time, all this energy, and you have like a 3 or 4 hour window. And, unfortunately for the people walking those hallways, you're a number. Like, you're paying for the trip. And so it becomes a very different experience to be behind that trade show booth and try to engage effectively with a large group of people that you've paid a lot of money to meet, right? So now you've got money in the game, and you need to close deals to pay for the trip, and so it becomes a very different dynamic when you look at a trade show floor and meet and greeting the different vendors.
Yeah. I always found the show a great way to connect with people that you might not see anywhere else. And I know a lot of the park people, dreamers who are there. I mean, I think over the years, I've met quite a few that have actually been able to launch their project because of people they meet at the show. And that's one of the unique aspects of the show, I think, too. So just that networking. But it was great. I loved it this year. It was, and the weather's always fantastic. I didn't know the weather was so nice in Denver at the beginning of October.
Yeah, it was not. This year was really the first year they had it. If you remember, it snowed the second day, but this year it was absolutely perfect weather. At the end of the event, they did a taco truck meetup outside amongst all the units that were set up outside. And it looked like a photo shoot for Vogue. The light was perfect. The weather was perfect. There was a DJ playing on the top of a glass glamping unit. So it was a glass glamping unit with a DJ rocking at the top of it, and it was a surreal environment. It was just like you looked around a few times going, is this really a trade show? Like, again, did I walk into a rave or something like that? This is crazy.
You go to an event like that, and we're entering conference season for the fall. You go to an event like that and you get all this energy and everything is really positive. I know on the glamping side, things are growing. I guess, what are you hearing, Mark, on your end? I know you have a couple Facebook pages as far as the market in general, RV parks, campgrounds. Are you hearing that people are doing pretty well this year? Is it kind of depending on the region they're in, I guess?
No, overall this year is a down year for properties. The actual trend line on travel, it changed on July 13th. You can go look up the event that occurred on July 13th and know that the market actually turned down there. So normally interest in travel and searches for campgrounds, it peaks on Labor Day, so it travels up all the way through the end of August and then starts its downward trend through December 31st. This year it peaked July 13th and actually trended downward from there. And what we saw was a lot of parks in the middle of July, those bookings already occurred. So for a lot of park operators, they didn't feel that downturn until the end of August, early September, when the bookings that they usually would get for those shoulder seasons into October, into September and October would normally happen. And so we started getting a lot of calls from parks the end of August, early September, saying, "Hey, Mark, what's going on? I'm not able to get people in here." And the reality is the market has materially turned. The reality is we have an election coming up here in the next week from when we're filming this, and that's going to dictate a lot of what happens over the next few months. I'm advising parks that are down in the snowbird states to be ready for a rough year for you, especially if you rely upon Canadian travelers in general. The Canadian RV travelers are not coming down this year. They have really high health costs. Plus, observing from the outside, they are all like, let's just wait, because who knows what's going to happen in the U.S. during this election time. And so I'm advising my snowbird parks just to be ready. It's going to be a little bit of a rough year for you. How things look after that, as of this point, ask me in a week and I'll be able to tell you, because right now it's kind of a guessing game.
So we've been hearing a lot about the shrinking booking window all year, since last January. Is that part of this too? Was it election driven? Was it just economy driven, or just attitude?
There was an article earlier this week that said 76% of people expect something negative to happen during this election cycle. And, no matter who you talk to, it doesn't matter their political opinion or whatnot. If you ask them, hey, do you think something weird's going to happen between now and election time? As the election's gotten closer, people have said, yes, I do believe that. And so when you take that as a general trend, and I've been talking about this since February that this was going to happen. When you take that as a general trend, I'm not going to plan 3 months in advance. If I have an RV and nothing's happened and we have a nice weekend, well, let's book this weekend and go camping, right? So your booking window is going to shrink in general. I mean, obviously there's going to be exceptions and outliers, but in general, you're going to book less distance out and you're going to book less distance from your house. So what we saw after that July 13th event, because if we're looking at data from campground views, right? And so our data is people who don't know the campgrounds are actually looking to travel. You know the campgrounds that are around you, so you don't need to search for it, right? So what we saw is that people compressed their distance. They stayed within a gas tank of home, and basically let's go camping because it's the cheapest form of travel. It's a good way to get away. So people were still traveling, just not at the volume and not at the distance that they traditionally would. And so that's kind of what we're seeing going into the wintertime too. The story of the Canadian travelers is an example. So we're seeing that going into the wintertime. What happens in the spring will be dictated by the outcome of this election. I'll go on the record and say that if it goes one way, you're going to see a massive downturn in travel. If it goes another way, you're going to see our industry explode.
What's your thoughts on the international and cruise travel? I believe cruise companies are seeing a record number of activity this year, or they're seeing high activity at least. Is that impacting campgrounds too? People are just more willing to do international travel or cruises than maybe they had been in the last couple of years.
Yeah, when you look at the actual number of cruise ships, the numbers that it takes to actually change their financial reporting is not massive, right? You put 4,000 people on a boat, it's full, and there's not a lot of cruises taking place. So the actual volume of people that are cruising compared to RVing or anything else, it's not enough to actually change the dynamic of how many people travel. The biggest thing that we see, and it's coming out in the data, is it's not cheap to travel right now. Gas is still relatively high, but not just that, but your food costs and also, in my case, I was just looking at my own homeowner's insurance, and my own homeowner's insurance has doubled in the last 2 years, and our property taxes have doubled in the last year. In our case, in the last year, our property taxes have doubled. And you're hearing that across the board all over the U.S., where people's insurance and their just costs of everything has gone up. And so as a result, they have to cut back in other ways. So they might not be going on 10 RV trips. They might go on 4 RV trips this year, and their trip won't be as long in distance or time. So they're staying closer to home and going for less days out. So again, that's all general data. On the flip side, we're also seeing Camping World just reported the results for their RV sales, and they did all right? They're up year over year on new RV sales. And we've been hearing that from the dealer networks, where there's kind of this bottom where people are still buying RVs. So we still have folks that are buying RVs and traveling. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's just we're coming off this massive high COVID. We kind of have come down, and expectations need to adjust, and actually business practices and marketing needs to adjust for the campgrounds.
I think this summer they saw a market increase in European travel, not just on cruises, but European travel in general. And I think that was all the stuff that was planned as people came out of COVID. They were finally taking those vacations this summer, and they kind of ruined the places. You read a lot of those Italy sites. It was just so crowded at everything that was touristy popular that people were coming back and saying, I didn't have as good a time as I thought. It was just too many people. And so I think it's going to be that swing again. If people didn't have a good time, or they felt it was too crowded, they won't go again next year, the next 2 year after, or 2 years after. So it's going to be a cycle for that I think our industry will benefit from. And another thing, I've been talking to a lot of dealers lately, and the ones that say that they're really doing good have made a real effort to get rid of the old inventory, the 1 and 2 and 3 year old stuff that was still sitting there that they'd overbought. And they're still fighting through that. The ones that are really rocking are the ones that are making the orders on the 25s.
Yeah. And to the point about areas being ruined, one of the things that we've seen, and this is a more recent trend, just when you look at the consumer, is this trend towards short form content, whether that be TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. When you think about that from a marketing perspective, and it's actually what I spoke about, Ben, at the Glamping Show, is as a destination, as a campground, as a place people go, a lot of their expectations are built in prior to them arriving. So their expectations of what they're going to experience, see, and do at your property, and as a result, the experience that they're going to have when they're actually there, is predetermined by the information they receive in advance of that. And so one of the things you see on these really popular areas is you see a lot of really glowing, pretty pictures on Instagram and all that stuff, and people are unable to reproduce that in real life based upon their own perceptions of what that looks like. And so then there's a disconnect when they arrive, if that makes sense, right? They have this idea, it's going to be amazing, and then they get there and there's 500 people, like, well, that's not what I expected. Therefore, their expectations are lower. And so I talk heavily about that, and that's a giant shift for our industry and our operators to think about, that a big portion of the experience guests will have at your property is directly related to what you set as expectations before they ever arrive. And so I believe going forward, the most effective operators will be the ones that do a really good job of setting expectations prior to that person ever arriving at their property. And then as a result, that person will have the experience that you make them expect themselves to have.
That's got to be even more critical when you've got glamping involved, even under a traditional campground, because you're typically dealing with a pretty inexperienced guest on the park, and they may have stayed at some higher end glamping resort someplace, and then they book on yours, and it doesn't match up, or it's not what they expected. So I imagine a product like yours gets to be more crucial when you talk on the glamping side.
Absolutely, yeah. The glamping is like the perfect example, because I don't know about you, but like with my wife, she sleeps with a noise machine on in our room, right? You get into a glamping tent, you've got fabric, and you're going to hear all sorts of it. And you just, that alone, you have a crummy night's sleep, you're going to be a grouch the next day, and it's going to impact your stay. And so really setting expectations is incredibly important as we look ahead to how do you market parks now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's take a minute, recognize our sponsor, Campgrounds of America, and we'll be right back with Mark. Campgrounds of America is the leading brand in camping, known for its 60-plus years of expertise and trusted quality. By joining the KOA family, franchisees benefit from the strong brand recognition, operational excellence, and a proven business model designed to foster growth and success. The flexible franchise options empower owners to achieve their goals while providing an exceptional camping experience for guests. To learn more about joining the KOA family of campgrounds, visit ownakoa.com. Hi, welcome back to WCM's Park Update, and we are chatting with Mark Koep, the CEO and founder of Campground Views. And Mark, you gave a little talk at the Glamping Show about marketing. I guess, what do you tell park owners right now as far as, they're seeing business decrease maybe a little bit, maybe they're thinking about cutting back on some spending, and unfortunately, sometimes people are like, oh, well, we don't need to, maybe the marketing budget gets trimmed a little bit. Is that something you tell park owners to cut out a little bit, or is marketing more important than ever, I guess, right now?
Well, option 3, I think that was, marketing is more important than ever. So here's the biggest thing for campgrounds and RV parks, and let's be real. The last 3.5 years, they haven't had to do squat. You didn't have to advertise. People were seeking you out and finding you in order to stay at your park, and they were fighting over getting in your doors. That time for the majority of parks, some of them still experience that, but for the majority of parks is long gone. You actually need to advertise. And so the problem is that these parks realistically haven't had to invest a lot of time and energy in advertising over the last several years. They may have a Google Ads campaign or a few little things going, but they're not really paying attention to it. Now they need to market it, because they haven't done it for so long, they don't know what to do. And so we're running into a lot of parks that are literally like, what do we do? Where do we spend our money? How do we reach these people? And the reality is the way you reach consumers today is very challenging. It's actually hard to reach consumers. You can't just go up and run a Facebook page and expect a whole bunch of people to show up there, because they're not really on Facebook anymore. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, they're on YouTube watching shorts, and they're actually consuming content differently than they previously did. So they're expecting short form video format in order to gain information. And so it's vastly changing the way parks need to market. And my advice to parks right now is, if you're not actively marketing yourself, you're going to be in real trouble. The parks that we know that did okay, or even were slightly up this year, they're the ones that were already investing heavily in marketing and continue to do that. And so they're feeling that result. There was a conversation a couple days ago, I think it was in the last 2 days, on the Facebook group about an operator who has a Halloween weekend. Usually the Halloween weekends are sold out for them. They're the only weekends they sell out. And like, well, it was like 60% full or 80% full or whatever it was. It wasn't sold out. What happened? What's that mean? Well, it means you didn't market it. Your market shifted. The amount of people, the people who traditionally came to you are no longer coming, and you didn't go out and get new people to replace them. Therefore, those folks aren't there. People don't learn this stuff by osmosis. They're being bombarded by information all the time. Right now, again, it's an election year, so they're being bombarded by huge amounts of information that's distracting them from being able to find you.
I work with a lot of campground owners that, work on their content online, and I guess I've noticed there's a lot of owners that are sort of ditching the amenities that are employee driven, the ones that are high touch on the employee side. Number one, they can't find the employees, especially late in the season, to run those things anymore. And minimum wages have gone up. The market demand on people, are you going to stay around for the whole year, or are you going to go back to school? Are you going to go to the next job up as you progress? And I just noticed a lot of campgrounds that have discontinued, the family activities they might have had before that had to be monitored. It just seems like that's a trend too, that campgrounds may have a little bit less on the amenity side.
Well, yeah, and also the consumers changed too on their demand of amenities. So a lot of parks that, a lot of their traditional activities weren't being participated in as much, and so it's like, can we go and do something else? To your point, that's cheaper to operate. Locally here, there's an owner of a corn maze. So it's an annual fall corn maze thing. Her cost to attend that has doubled the last 3 years. So doubled last year, and it doubled again this year to attend her event. And she's had to cut her hours down for the exact reason you said, Mike. She can't get employees in there to run it. So she's actually had to increase her costs for you to attend, because her costs have gone up, and change the hours in order to make sure she even has staff to run the different zip lines and everything else that's going there. And so this is impacting parks. And also people have changed. I mean, the reality is COVID shifted the way people interact with one another and discuss things and engage. And so as a result, you're seeing the parks adapt to that and change. On the flip side, there's games like pickleball. You don't need staff to run that. It's the hottest darn thing going right now. Who knows how long that lasts, but it's hot right now. And so you throw in a pickleball court and you've got people showing up to play pickleball. So it's a matter of just changing and adjusting your amenity mix to what people are demanding.
What?
Mark, you were with me out in Salt Lake City a few years ago at the RVIA event out there, and I think was that 2018, 2017? I can't even remember what year it was anymore. And we were in the KOA booth where we were talking about the campground of the future, and you saw all the stuff that we were walking people around with the virtual reality goggles on. Where are we at on thinking about the campground of the future? Are we still coming up with some really strange stuff you're seeing out there, or is it just more traditional?
The things that stuck out to me at that event, if you remember, were the pet sites where you had the fence around the dog area, and a number of KOAs and a number of other parks have actually adopted that and are doing that. So that happened, right? And what you're seeing is that our industry is generally slow on taking up technology. Like, we don't need to adapt and don't have to adapt.
Yep.
But technology is changing the world around us. And the biggest thing that's going to happen, and is actively happening right now, is the use of AI and other services. That's going to change the dynamics. And there's a few tunnels you can go down there, a few rabbit holes you can follow along the thought process on that. And what I believe is, I want to generally believe the good will happen out of it, and it's going to free people up and free their time and make, increase overall wealth. I think the result of that will be the opportunity for people to travel more often, and they're going to choose to travel in RVs and campers and explore this country in that way. So as a result, the parks will need to adapt the way they engage with people and the services they offer. As for what the campground of the future looks like, I think probably the best thing, I'm going to be blunt on this because I have a very strong opinion about this. The best thing going on right now is the fact that EV sales have declined and that they're not growing like everybody expected them to. That's a huge benefit for us, because that was going to be a major pain in the butt if all of a sudden we had a whole bunch of electric vehicles showing up at RV parks and campgrounds. They're just not equipped to handle that type of charge. So that's a generally a good thing. But where do we go technology-wise? I'm going to avoid going too far down that rabbit hole. All I can say is that if I run an RV park right now, and I'm advising folks to run this, you're going to have a lot of change over the next 5 years occurring on your business operations, the way you interact with your government agencies, and the way you interact with your campers and guests.
We've seen a lot more corporate parks, investors, development groups, all that kind of stuff. I guess, are they more well equipped to handle, these kind of marketing challenges, taking a look at the future? Is that just going to increase this corporate takeover, I guess, of the industry? Or, does it hurt mom and pops when you have all these corporate people in here?
there's levels of answer on that, right? So there's some really sophisticated investment groups that are now getting into the space with lots of capital behind them that understand the market and are performing very well when they buy their properties. That's currently a really small segment of that group. There's a bulk of folks right now that come from storage and have, reasonable amounts of capital that are buying properties and trying to make them turnkey to where it's just a cash flow system. Their challenge is marketing and operations. So if you're an investment group and you don't want to touch the property, you better have a really good marketing team and better have a really good operations team. The challenge with an RV park or campground is your operations team means you need to have good people on site. You need to have a good manager or GM running the property who cares about the property and operates it well. And so what I've seen from the investment groups is that piece of it is actually their biggest challenge, finding the right team to operate at not just one of their parks, but all of their parks across their portfolios and make sure they perform. And then you add on the marketing to that. So to that end, Ben, what we're seeing is some of the more successful parks out there are mom and pops. But at the same time, like if you look, Ojai's coming up, they have their Park of the Year awards. When you go down that list, it's all of the big owners, right? It's all these big multi-parks that are on that list. What does that mean? Does that mean the mom and pops aren't doing well? No, it just means the mom and pops aren't really engaging with the associations at any level. They're just running their businesses. I know of a lot. I mean, the Campground of the Year is a mom and pop in Nevada City, California, a small little location that kills it. There's a property, Riverwalk, Marcia, she was in the floods, all those floods that occurred. Her park was completely flooded out. It took them 5 days. They turned the park around and were open that next weekend after that. That's operations, right? That's the ability to take a disaster, turn it around, clean up your park, and get it back open. And so to answer your question, Ben, there's several levels. I could talk about it for probably hours, but when you see the big money coming in, their challenge is marketing and operations, and they don't yet have the systems in place, primarily on the operations side, to where they're going to completely take over the market. And then I'll actually add on to that because I think it's important. It's an important nuance to make for our industry. Half of our campgrounds are public agency properties. No corporate entity is going to own those public agency parks. So those public agency parks are actually the wrench in our entire system because they artificially keep prices low. They're an alternative to a private RV park. And so as a result, it kind of caps the profit potential of a campground or RV resort because, hey, if it's $80 for full hookups and I can go stay for $30 at a public park and run my solar and generator, you're going to have people doing that.
Yeah, we got to wrap up here pretty soon, but I did want to tackle the Spectrum issue. I wanted to know if you heard anything else on the Spectrum internet issue, and for people who don't quite know what we're talking about, you can always go to woodallcm.com and look up the Spectrum story we did. But basically, have you heard any update on anybody with more issues or making progress on it, or is it?
Well, I'll give kudos to Paul David over at Ojai. They did run with it right away, and so they formed like a task force to start reaching out. But what I've heard kind of through the grapevine, so this is unofficial, but what I've heard through the grapevine is basically Spectrum has taken what we heard kind of was going to happen during that forum we did. They've taken a hard line. They're not negotiating with anybody on this. They are you need to pay a lot more money for your internet if you're going to share it in your park, and there's no alternative here. And so it's unfortunate that I'd heard. Again, this was through the grapevine, so I guess don't quote me on it. But there was somebody had suggested that KOA Corporate was able to negotiate for their KOA properties, kind of an extension of the deadline to give them more time, which kudos for them for making that happen for their franchisees. But in general, we've got parks that are being shut down. It's still kind of low key. We're going into the off season, so I expect as we go into this next springtime that it's going to be that basically the reporting is going to go up because it'll start hitting the parks. We're like, wait, I don't have internet anymore. What happened, right? And unfortunately, a lot of park operators tend to be reactionary in that regard. They're tossing the notification letters. They're not seeing it. And when that internet gets shut off, then it's going to become an issue for them. The unfortunate thing is that it's going to cause a decision for a lot of park owners, either no internet at all or blazing fast internet. There's going to be no in between. So it's either no internet provided, blazing fast. The problem with that, and my concern with that, is internet is it's a utility now. People expect to be able to travel and receive it. And if
Yeah.
you go from no to blazing fast, there's going to be this nomads land. Hey, what about that? There's going to be this nomads land where parks are going to be impacted by their inability to finance high-speed internet for their properties, and it's going to potentially be a negative driver for folks' travels.
I'm still, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop where other internet providers catch on and start doing the same thing, I guess. I don't know.
That's exactly what's going to happen. And the problem is, like, when you look at the internet, it's why I was excited to have Tim Rout on that call, because he knows this stuff so well. The reality is it's a quasi free market. It's not really in some degrees. It is in others. And, it's just confusing. Like, there's an entity out there right now who's emailing parks saying, we can provide high-speed internet to all of your guests for $50 a month. And all they're doing is they're reselling a commercial Verizon cell phone card, like a 5G Verizon card. And anybody who's ever used that knows that once you hit 2 gigabytes, you're getting throttled. And so there's this bait and switch going on. And unfortunately, it goes to that decision. Park owners only have so much budget. They're not going to pay. Some parks aren't going to pay $9,000 a month to provide internet to guests, right? It doesn't make sense when you have 75 sites to pay $9,000. So they will have to make the decision, sorry, we can't provide internet in our property. And so I think it's going to be a messy one. The good thing is our industry is kind of blessed. We have some really good suppliers of internet services in the space. So my guess is that those folks are actually going to solve the problem without outside entities solving it for us.
Yeah, well, hopefully. And hopefully it doesn't impact park owners as severely as I think during your podcast you mentioned the one lady had they wanted to charge her like $9,000 or $10,000 a month or something ridiculous. So hopefully they can get that ironed out.
Actually, Ben, that's exactly. So what's happening? So I am getting emails from people who are dealing with it, and the way it's being handled on the Spectrum side, I'll qualify this. This is my opinion based upon what I've seen, has been not positive. They're basically saying, sure, we'll negotiate with you. Just sign this letter of intent. When you read the letter of intent, it's basically saying, I agree, you can shut down my other services, and I'm going to do a deal with you. And it's like, dude, So my advice, if you're dealing with Spectrum, have an attorney review any documents you are presented before you sign them.
Yeah, and that just seems like a good business thing anyways, to have an attorney doing documents that you're signing. So when it comes to business, I guess. But anyways, it's an interesting issue. One that when I came into the industry, you would have never thought of. You were fighting people just to get Wi-Fi at their parks, and then COVID kind of sped things up, and this is where we're at now, I guess. So, but Mark, it's always great to see you, and always great to chat with you, and I'm sure I'll see you at some conferences this fall. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Great seeing you guys.
And we will be back again next week.
Thank you for listening to WCM's Park Update, a production of Woodall's Campground Magazine. Join us for a new show each Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn for daily news and updates, and subscribe to our news feed on our website at woodallscm.com.